It's Thursday, July 3rd, 2025, and we have a triple threat of severe weather starting up here in the northern plains, then a little isolated threat down here in the Great Lakes region to Midwest. And then our last threat is going to be in the New England to Northeast. And our greatest risk are going to be up here in the northern plains with a slight risk of severe weather, and then another slight risk back here in parts of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic to New England area. This threat is going to be mostly a wind risk with a 15% risk of severe winds up here in the northern plains, another 15% risk of severe winds out here in the New England to Northeast area. And then all of those are going to be accompanied by a 5% risk of severe winds. And then we have a lone 5% risk of severe winds out here in the Midwest to Great Lakes region. And in these areas, gusts of over 60 miles an hour to even possibly 70 miles an hour are going to be a possibility. And our hail risk is going to be mostly confined up here to the northern plains. We have a 15% chance of seeing some hail, possibly up to 2 inches in diameter. And then that's going to be surrounded by a conditional 5% chance of hail. And then we have another 5% chance of hail back up here going from the Mid-Atlantic up into the Northeast and through the New England area. And lastly, we have a very isolated 2% chance of tornadoes up here in the northwestern corner of North Dakota. So that's definitely going to be something to watch. And then, like always, this is going to be surrounded by general thunderstorm activity in much of the US, with a little area where not really any storms are expected, starting in the Central Plains, moving through Arkansas, back into parts of the Southeast and the Mississippi River Valley. And tomorrow's risk is going to be pretty much entirely confined up here to the northern plains and Midwest, with another large area of general thunderstorm activity. So it looks like severe weather is definitely going to persist for a little longer. Here's a simulated reflectivity from our northern plains risk area, and we can see a little kind of line of some isolated rain showers out here in the morning, which is going to be indicative of a boundary which is going to be laid across the region. Then we see a lot of wind vectors pointing north, which is going to help with evection of moist air and some storm ingredients, which would help to juice up the atmosphere. And as we go into the late afternoon, we could see a little area of a couple of discrete storms fire up here in northwestern North Dakota, which would be that main driver of that hail threat and tornado threat. And it also looks like they could coincide with when that low level jet increases, possibly around sunset. So that would absolutely bolster the tornado threat with these storms. So I think tornadoes are definitely going to be in play in northwestern North Dakota today. But a question about these storms is going to be how organized can they get and how long can they sustain? Because the HRRR is predicting that they're going to fall apart pretty quickly because they're going to be an area behind that boundary with more stable air. So that's definitely something to look at. But it appears that the main threat for the region is going to be a large, powerful line of storms, which develops right after sunset, which is going to be initiated by some troughing and the low-level jet itself. And this will bring strong winds and some small hail to the region with the conditional threat of possibly a spin-up tornado. But because our wind vectors are going to be pointing directly into the storm and not kind of perpendicular to it, that would diminish that spin-up tornado threat. And this is going to continue through the early night hours up here in parts of North Dakota before it dissipates in the early morning hours on Friday. And then here's the simulated reflectivity from our mid-Atlantic to northeastern risk area. And we can see that starting in the early hours on Thursday, so before lunch, we could even see a couple of organized storms up here in the northeast. And pushing further into the day, so right after midday is when it appears that nonstop storms will probably start for this region, with multiple rounds of weather in some isolated areas. But these storms are going to be initiated by some troughing, a weak boundary, and they'll also bring some organizing shear to the region. Now, the current highest risk of severe weather is going to be down here, spanning from the middle part of New Jersey all the way up into New England. And I could actually see a higher risk of severe weather being issued for up here in parts of Maine, so the deep northeast, because it looks like that is where that potential for organized storms is going to be at its greatest. So these storms are going to bring mostly a severe wind threat with a conditional threat for small hail, and I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe a brief weak tornado out here with some of our more organized storms either, but that risk is going to remain very, very low. And then by mid-afternoon, all of this activity is going to be done up here. And then lastly, this is our simulated reflectivity from our Midwest risk area, and it's going to be a very conditional risk associated with this cluster of storms firing around eastern Iowa in the late afternoon to early evening hours, which could possibly cluster and pose some of a severe wind threat. Here are 500 millibar winds, and we're going to look for two areas of troughing one up here in the northwest, and then one up here in the northeast. So what we're going to watch for is this little shortwave up here moving through the region, which is going to help to force up storms and provide some organizing shear. And right when we're expecting peak storm time around midday to mid-afternoon, that is when we see quite a bit of shear across this region, which will help to organize those storms. And the same thing will go for our storms back here in the northern plains, where our large-scale forcing will help to lift them up and provide some organizing shear as well. Then I also want to look at our 700 millibar winds, which are associated with greater threats of tornado genesis. And we do see quite a bit out here in our northeastern risk area, which is another reason why I think there is a non-zero chance of possibly a weak, short-lived tornado out there. And on our main tornado risk area out here in northwestern North Dakota, which is still very small, we actually don't see a lot of 700 millibar throw, which could possibly hinder that risk. But there definitely is going to be a real threat of possibly a tornado out there as well. Here's a weather sounding from our northern plains risk area, and in our hodograph, we do see some curving in the low levels, then a pretty decent extension, which would indicate greater deep layer shear and possibly better storm organization. Low level helicity is going to be low, and our low level shear is going to be pretty low. But if those storms can coincide with that low level jet kind of kicks up, that could possibly help with that tornado threat to be realized. And our bulk shear is going to be definitely enough for storms to organize. It's going to be nearing that 40 knot threshold at 35 knots. We do see some veering in our winds, which will help to also organize storms. Our lowest cloud level is going to be a bit high to support a tornado threat, but sometimes the cloud tops of those storms can actually lower the lowest cloud level in front of where that tornado would be. Sometimes we do see a decent bit of hail up here near our freezing level, and we do see pretty good mid-level lapse rates. So with that threat of discrete supercells, that hail threat could definitely be realized. We do see some dry air aloft, which could help to support that threat of severe winds. Then our dew point is going to be plenty for the northern plains, which will support that threat for all hazards of severe weather. Then our low-level lapse rates are going to be pretty solid as well. We're going to have a very juiced up atmosphere at over 4,000 cape. Then our precipitable water is going to be 1.66, coupled with a downdraft cape of nearing 1,300. So that will also help to support that threat of severe winds as well. So I think the biggest hindrance for our tornado threat tomorrow in our northern plains risk area is, will these storms be able to get surface based? And if they will, I don't really think the lack of shear will be as much of an issue, because they are expected to coincide with when that low level jet would increase. So in summary, I think there is a threat for tornadoes up here in the northern plains, as well as severe winds and possibly some hail up to 2 inches in diameter. Here is a weather sounding from our Midwest risk area, and we do see a bit of a curve in the low levels, then a elongation in our hodograph. Our low level shear is going to be low, and our low level helicity is going to be low, but our bulk shear is going to be probably enough for a couple of organized storms out there. We do see a very odd vertical wind profile, which would pretty much only support that threat for severe winds. Our lowest cloud level is going to be a bit high, but it doesn't really matter because a tornado threat is not expected to be realized out here at all. Our mid-level lapse rates are going to be fairly low, and then our freezing layer is going to be pretty high. So even though we do have some cape near our freezing layer, I don't think that threat for hail will be realized at all. We do have pretty solid dew points at around 73, so that will help to support that threat for severe winds. And we do have some dry air aloft, which will also help to support that threat for severe winds. And that's going to be coupled with a juiced up atmosphere nearing 4,000 cape, and also a precipitable water of 1.69 and a downdraft cape of 1,100. And then that's also going to be coupled with a 3 cape of 148. So I think severe winds with that cluster in the Midwest could definitely be realized. Moving into a weather sounding from the Mid-Atlantic, once again, we see a elongation in our hodograph. Our low level shear is going to be pretty low, and our low level helicity is going to be pretty low, but our bulk shear is going to be decent at 30 knots, which will help to support that threat of organized storms. Our vertical wind profile is going to be pretty streamlined, so that will support that threat of lines of storms, and also mostly a wind threat. Our freezing layer is not going to be terribly high, so even though our mid-level lapse rates are kind of low and we don't have a super large amount of cape near our freezing layer, that threat for hail could be realized. And our dew points aren't going to be super high, but they'll definitely be enough to support that threat of all hazards of severe weather. And then we do have some dry air aloft, which could help to support that threat for severe winds. But our atmosphere isn't going to be as juiced up, with only about 1,500 to 1,000 joules per kilogram of cape. So that could possibly hinder the strength of these storms out there. Then our precipitable water is going to be 1.29, and our downdraft cape is going to be 1,000. And then our 3 Cape is going to be 96. So things that would help to support that threat for severe winds. So in lower parts of the Northeast, I definitely think severe winds are going to be the main threat with a conditional risk of some small hail. And then here's a weather sounding from the deep Northeast, so up into parts of Vermont and Maine. We do see some curving in our hodograph, then a pretty nice elongation. Our low level helicity is going to be low and our low level shear is going to be low. But our bulk shear is going to be nearing that 40 knot threshold for organized storms. The lowest cloud level would be enough to support maybe a tornado threat. And we do have some veering in our winds, which would help to support some organization of storms. Our low level lapse rates are going to be very high. And then we do have a decent bit of moisture out here, which would also help to support that threat of possibly all hazards of severe weather. Our freezing layer is going to be at a decent height. Then our mid-level lapse rates are going to be low at 6.5 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer. But we are going to have a tad bit of cape up here near our freezing layer. So couple that with our shear, I do think there is absolutely a threat for some small hail. And then our atmosphere is going to be actually pretty primed up here, nearing 3,000 to 2,000 cape. So that will help with storms. Our precipitable water is going to be 1.26 inches. Then our downdraft cape is going to be not super high at all, at only 650. But our 3 Cape is going to be 197. So that coupled with our high low level lapse rates, I definitely do think the threat of severe winds would be possible in the deep Northeast, as well as the threat for some small hail and possibly even a weak brief tornado. But that threat is still going to be pretty small. And then for the 3rd day in a row, the National Hurricane Center has gone ahead and increased the probability of a tropical storm or tropical depression developing out here in the Atlantic from 30 to 40% now. So although the chance is still below 50, so it's pretty low at 40, the chance of at least a tropical depression or a tropical storm is absolutely increasing for areas north of Cape Canaveral all the way up into parts of the Outer Banks.